Okay, so driving home from work right now. I know I finally got that other video up. It was like, a little over like 3/4 of an hour. Long upload after a long time not really putting anything out as in terms of content. Anyways, haven't relapsed as of yet. I think yesterday or Saturday. I think that was actually would be like day one. So like maybe day two. But I'll mark things on the calendar, but I'm really not gonna sort of announce, so many days have been accomplished in this new streak, in this sort of recovery streak, so to speak. Until or unless I've gone through a significant amount of days where I'm actually feeling like the effects of Nofap returning, so to speak. But man, I wanted to sort of build off of the last video, the latest one, because man, it's just been a flood of emotions and knowledge and sort of dark family secrets and a lot of things, both positive and negative, as of late, because focusing in on it. This is happening in the midst of me starting up classes again and actually making some serious progress. So far doing well in those classes, and I have an exam on Thursday, which I'm going to do some preparation for it, but I pretty much have the material. I feel, under wraps. I'm not saying anything's guaranteed. Obviously I'm still going to have to do preparation for it to sort of warm up for it, but because there's some spots I definitely need to review, but in the midst of all this, this effort I'm making to build myself up and to get things really going and turn up the heat and get the pedal to the metal, get traction, get moving towards my major goals in life, especially being in my 30s and trying to really sort of make up for lost time, make up for lost ground, get myself to a point where I feel like I've finished unfinished business, and I can truly feel comfortable in my own skin, and et cetera, et cetera. Given that my last living grandparent is 92, as we speak, according to current knowledge, I say she is. When you have a grandparent at that age, you really don't know when the day is going to come, and you probably, if you're human, in my opinion, you have some fear of it or anxiety about it, cause, you're not just going to feel sadness and loss and such, but especially if it's your last living grandparents, a door is closed on an era, and you don't have anyone from that period of history and life in your family to really talk to and to understand and to learn from, and you'll come to realize that you never really get enough time, and there's just the things you wish you could have talked about, wish you could have learned, wish you could have heard about, questions you wish you could have asked, and things of that nature, such that you'd at least have learned, and maybe if you could have recorded things down or gotten records or had things written or something of that nature. Heck, if you could have had things recorded, conversation as to what was life like during this time, or how did you meet grandpa or grandma, or what was that all like, or things of that nature, so you could at least have that. And with that being said, I really made this effort, part of this whole overall family genealogy research deal, to really dig in and learn about my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who passed away when I was 5. I think I was, how close was I was closing in on the halfway mark between 5 and 6 years old when he passed away. I was that's how close it was. A couple months away from being 5.5 years old. actually more like a month, now that I think about it, because it was the 29th of April, 1992, and he was 66 years old. And just a year into retirement, at the cusp of old age, and he passed away. And there were snippets here and there that I, learned about, stuff that, my parents told me, or that I don't remember if my grandma had told me certain things, but I'd mostly heard about from my parents. And obviously my mother would want to emphasize certain things over others, and there were just things that she either didn't know or she just didn't understand about him. And my dad has his perspective on things, and things that he saw and understood that it's kind of like a blind spot that my mother had that my dad didn't have, and vice versa. And I had like vague bits and pieces of information, and I had like only like a handful of memories of him. And the big, sort of like the big thing I'd say that like he did in his life that was aside from all the other things, the thing that really connected him to sort of like world history and was of consequence, meaning, impact, value, that sort of thing, purpose, was his service in the United States Navy during World War II. And it wasn't a huge like stretch of time, because he was born in 1926, graduated high school in 1944. He was already going through like medical examinations and all that to enlist, and then he officially enlisted in June of that year, end of the month, and then went on to training, basic training, and then his specialization schools and that sort of deal, and then ended up being sent off to fill a vacancy in the Atlantic Fleet. And he did 2 years. He was in the reserves. He could have re-enlisted. He chose not to come back home. And I have his official military personnel file. Been reading through it, reading and rereading through it, and all these things I'm learning about him. And then it sparked this conversation, a series of conversations with my grandmother, and there were things that she revealed to me about like his family dynamics, what was going on there, and how it influenced him, affected him, his mindset, his belief set, concerning different things, like for instance, the fact is like this is probably very much like the old social contract way of thinking about things, and sort of conventional masculinity. But he felt that, as the firstborn son, if things weren't working out with his parents, like his father, I hate to speak ill of the dead, but his father, who was my great-grandfather, was, very much the raging alcoholic who could never hold down a job to save his life. Once more the family, very much like a deadbeat dad, so to speak. His mother was, nice lady, but an enabler. And my grandpa felt that because he was the oldest, son, he had to take all these responsibilities on his own shoulders. And he sacrificed more, I think, than, and I've been in this situation myself where he sacrificed more than the people in question were really worth, even though they were his family. And he sacrificed more than I think he really understood at that point in time, which maybe is why later on in his life he didn't like to really talk about his, short, service in the Navy. He might not have thought that he did enough to really be worth, for it to really be worth talking about. But at the same time, I think also maybe part of him realized, me being his grandson, and having been in some similar situations, he might have not wanted to talk about it, because it was like, it was sort of his, for his generation, is a lot of the times was the case. It was like his one chance to really get out there and get out from under his family and away from that toxic influence and environment. And I mean, he was exposed to all these sorts of ideas and possibilities that would never cross his mind if he'd been around his family at that time. Because my great grandpa, like I said, raging alcoholic, deadbeat dad, couldn't hold on to dad to save his life. I think he may have gotten himself and that whole family, basically kicked out the family farm which had been founded by my great-great-grandfather, who himself was a younger-born son of his generation. But instead of, being a deadbeat, he himself had gone out and established his own landed estate. Family farm, 250 acres or more. At least it was initially 250 acres. He may have grown it to more, but basically, my great-grandfather, he, like I said, raging alcoholic, deadbeat dad, baby of his, family's generation, or his generation of the family. Always found ways to not have to do work on the farm, etc., etc. But, my grandpa, it's like he had his one chance to get away from all of that and to be exposed to all these ideas and possibilities. And, if he'd been around his family that whole time, to return to that point, and he would have never been exposed to things like, working on airplanes and, being exposed to engineering and aerodynamics and how these things work. And he started as an aviation ordnanceman and rose all the way up to aviation ordnanceman 3rd class, which basically made him a petty officer 3rd class in that aviation branch. And, non-commissioned officer at 20 years old, in charge of, probably considered the equivalent of, multiple billions of dollars worth of, of military, combat equipment and ordnance and all that sort of stuff, and munitions and whatnot, and leading a team of, subordinates and, taking care of all that equipment and then operating as well. Because, some of them were also detailed to being machine gunners, so they were going to go out on some sort of aerial sortie or some dogfight or some anti-submarine, mission. Like, he'd be on board operating the machine guns, and having been exposed to that, having that sort of possibility shown to him, that's something that he would never have gotten at home. And then to sort of be basically put in a situation or led into a situation, where he sacrificed that. Because, he ended up basically having to be sort of the father figure for his younger siblings and, getting whatever job he could, becoming a meat cutter or like we would call like a butcher nowadays, to, make money at the grocery store in town, to pay for the rent, to make sure that his family didn't get evicted, taking out a GI loan to give them a house, things of that nature. And in his discharge papers, he indicated an interest in going to college and specifically to study aeronautical engineering. And it's like, you have this man who is your grandfather, barely got to know him, and now you get to see all these parallels between your life and his, which makes it even more like impactful, I guess, in a sense, because it's like part of you is from him, and you see those parallels, and it's kind of scary, but also it's the kind of thing that it's honestly made me cry. Like, I felt so bad for him, He was a good guy in so many ways, noble, virtuous, but also he had faulty or flawed, beliefs. He gave up a promising career in the Navy, which for a lot of guys has been a way out from under, and he gave that one chance up. And furthermore, even after he came back, he still had ambitions to do something. He tried to start a business and didn't have any encouragement or support from his own family. Sure as heck didn't have any guidance. There were some things he did where it was like, oh, I'm going to go and, take over this wholesale business. I'm going to buy these, goods and service, or goods, basically try and resell them, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't have an idea of how to do that. And he made some mistakes along the way that really wrecked his credit, which then meant that when my grandma and him went to get a house, get a mortgage to buy a house, it had to be her credit that they used. And they only found out about this when they were at the bank and they were getting denied for, the mortgage. And it was like, what's going on here? Oh, well, here's this, that, and the other that happened, or, that you're, talking to my grandma, that your husband, did, and this is why, his credit was trashed and why, we're not going to, approve this mortgage, blah, blah, blah. Things like that. And for those who have followed me on my channel for the last, several years, I'm sure, like, if they remember any of the things that I've said about my own family and my own family dynamics, it's scary how much it's almost like a carbon copy. Like, the way his father was, my mother is. The way his mother was, my father is. And the way I've been, where I've honestly, like, had, some of these opportunities that were given to me, like when I was the age that he was when he went into the Navy, and I had that chance, to become a naval officer and all these other things. And it's probably one of, if not, my biggest, regret in life has been screwing that up. And then I learned that, guess what? Your grandfather did many of the same things. He did basically the same thing there, and to really realize that, and sort of see where the similarities, where the divergences are or were. As much as I've been learning about him and sort of, closing the chapter, or closing the, that book, so to speak, by not only learning about him, but going through this process of gathering all these documents so I can apply for his medals to be issued, because he was eligible for a number of medals. Served honorably, was, given an honorable discharge, was active in number of campaigns. He was doing stuff with his life at that point that actually, like, was impactful and meaningful, unlike the rest of his deadbeat family, which, again, I don't like speaking ill of the dead. They've all passed away, as he did, some earlier, some, later. I think pretty much everyone, he was the oldest, and because of how his life was, he, passed away before, any of them. But all that being said, while I don't like speaking ill of the dad, it's like he was the one who actually did something that, 30 or so years after he passed away, like, it's still something worth knowing and speaking of, and something that would, gain him, an award, or actually two, from the United States government, specifically Department of Defense, Department of the Navy. And, he did that. They didn't. But, I'm basically finalizing this process of getting his awards issued, which he never really applied for, sadly enough. Which probably is, the reason why we just never really knew anything about what he had done. It's like even my grandma didn't know all that much until, like, I went and looked into this sort of stuff. It's been a real roller coaster, so to speak, emotionally speaking, because, again, like, I learned this sort of stuff, and it's kind of scared me, but at the same time, it's kind of made me appreciate certain things that I've had, which, he didn't have. So much of the tragedy of his life wasn't that he didn't have the smarts for it or something of that nature, but it was like he didn't have the support network, he didn't have the guidance, he didn't have a way out from under after a certain point in time, and he just got stuck. And when I went to visit my grandmother for her 92nd birthday, back in June, and I visited his grave, and they have a little like I don't know what you'd call it, but it's sort of like a stuck in the ground next to his headstone, with World War II, and then you see, like, the dates when he was born and then the date he died, and they have, like, his rank, the Navy engraved in that, that sort of thing, or his rating. I think it's actually, the term is rating for enlisted, and then it's like rank for officers. But You see that, I mean, I might not be tearing up right now, but like, you think about like the sum total of his life from beginning to finish, and just the trajectory it took, and again the parallels to mine. And one of the things that like I was really really lucky to have, and I don't know how this all like, it's almost, I mean, it really does seem like fate, because one thing that happened with me after I went back to my parents' house when from the time that I was in the Navy ROTC unit and came back after I'd let's just say I washed out. There's no other way of putting it. I mean, the sum total is I washed out. Whether or not I had the odds stacked against me, or people tried to find ways to undermine me or disrupt me, or whatever. I washed out and I went back to my parents' home. For a few years there, it was kind of like a wandering in the desert, being told by my mother, and to lesser extent by my father, that my life was over. I had my one chance at greatness, yada yada yada. And my mom saying things as cutting as, you might as well just go get some girl pregnant and get a retail job. Obviously not taking into account that even if that was my plan, it was the Great Recession and nobody was hiring, so to speak. And then I don't mean that literally nobody was hiring, but it might as well have been nobody hiring. And given what I've accomplished in recent years, I say that I had more potential for I had potential for greater things than that. But after a few years of wandering in the desert and reconnecting with some old friends who sadly turned out themselves to be, I don't want to say dead weights, but they were not good influences. Once I started breaking those ties once again, and it's like I started making better friends, which I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I got those friends. I could almost picture, the day that I walked into this. It was like the math and science building, which they tore it down. They actually, because that community college, they got a bunch of funding to build like an actual like nice looking centralized, this is where all the math and science offices and classrooms are at, kind of building in the center of the campus. But that building, I remember I can almost picture it right now when I walked into there, and that was the day that I met, I think it was two of my like longest term friends, even though I haven't necessarily spoken to them consistently in like the last several years. And I think the last time I hung out with them was like back in like 2017 or something like that, 2018, something like that. But I remember meeting them, and it was like I met people who came from very similar family situations to what I came from, where like you had, let's just say, abusive parents, didn't really believe in us, we're just disrupting our lives. Like one of my friends, like I think his mom his mom reminded me of my mother when I heard about how she was. And then his father was kind of like my dad, and she had like kicked him out of the house. I don't even know what it was for exactly. Like it was I think it was some disagreement on religion or politics, or she just I don't know, thought he was a deadbeat or something like that, and he ended up having to live out of his truck for like a year and a half, working at Chick-fil-A, and to a certain extent being supported by his then girlfriend, who kind of like took pity on him. Not gonna lie, she was kind of good looking, to put it lightly, but she at least had his back during that time. I think they did eventually break up. I don't know if they ever got back together again or whatever, but he'd gone through that. There was a couple others who had similar situations, but it was like I was able to form a support network. And, we'd be going to, like, one of the local universities, the library, and just, like, studying late into the night. We'd sneak into the graduate study room, which is open 24/7. And, one of us, like, usually it was me, because I could fake that I was a graduate student who had forgotten my ID, and then I could let everybody else in. Or we'd squat in this, like, study hall that was built into one of the dormitories that, somebody had, like, left the door open or something like that. We just would squat there, and we study all night, and have each other's backs and things. And if we could commiserate on the kind of stuff we were going through with our families or our girlfriends, or lack thereof, or whatever the case may be, or it may have been. And that's a large part of, like, why I was able to get out there, because, like, I was able to form sort of a power base support outside of my family. And eventually my dad, and to a significant extent my mom, did start to take my efforts seriously, and start to back off and respect what I was working on, even to a certain extent my sister. But that's so much of why I was able to get out from there and actually get my engineering degree and things of that nature. And of course this YouTube channel and the followers on here who would comment on my videos, and provide me with guidance, or just even, like, suggestions for different things. Like, this one guy off the train, he pointed out internal family systems model therapy, which I used to make a huge bunch of breakthroughs back in, like, 2017, 2018. And of course, Dark Magician and Alex, and the list goes on, the names go on. I could probably go back through my comments and then build up a list of people. But I've been fortunate enough to be able to have those things that my grandpa never had, because, like, once he was back there, it was like his family latched onto him. And I think one of his brothers actually did, like, go on to something by, like, joining the Air Force or their Army and making, like, a career of it. But once he was back there, it was, like, game over, because it wasn't until, like, he met my grandma, who was probably the first person in his life to really care about him and want him to succeed, even though she would get frustrated or angry with him from time to time. They'd have their arguments or their fights, but it was, like, a matter of, like, she was not angry at him. She was angry with him because she saw so much more potential in him. Like, she said that guy saw that he was way more serious about things than all the other guys, and also way more serious than his family, and that he had this drive for something. He had ambition. He wanted to do something more. He just didn't know how to do or what to do. No guidance, no support. And it's very much like a tragic story. But there's bits and moments here and there of inspiration and something to live up to. And there's a whole bunch of lessons and enlightenment in it, And, I realized one thing, kind of like bringing this back to Nofap or so, but for him, his coping mechanism was, drinking alcohol, was, drinking. He wasn't, from what I understand, necessarily as much of an alcoholic as, let's say, his father. Because him and my grandma, for instance, like, they worked together, for instance, to pay off the mortgage they had. My great-grandparents never owned their own home. They always rented. They were constantly getting evicted. Probably because, weren't paying the rent and didn't have the money for it, because, somebody was spending it on alcohol. It's a possibility. But my grandpa and grandma, they owned their own home. They actually had it paid off, like, decades ago. My grandpa squirreled away some money for some silver that he bought. He stacked some that his family could never do. He served honorably in the Navy. He's eligible for a couple awards, actually, which I'm trying to get, issued and, and sent out, that sort of deal. he did some things that were worthy of note and worthy of remembrance. And, it sounds in stark contrast to the waste of potential that he had. Because, when my dad met him and they got to know each other, my dad, I'm putting this in my own words, but my dad kind of thought to himself, like, what the hell is this guy doing working as a meat cutter, working as a butcher? Like, he's got so much more to him. Because when they want to talk about things like, fixing car problems or so, or like working on different, mechanical equipment, like trying to fix like a laundry machine or a dryer or something of that nature. And you see how my grandpa's mind would work, and how he could, we're going to do it. Basically, like, he would do almost like a root cause analysis and figure out what went wrong. And then, if you just fix this one part over here, all these other problems go away and the machine works again. It'd be like, wow, like, he figured that all out in a handful of minutes. Like, this guy's not dumb. This guy's not stupid. Like, again, what the hell is he doing working as a meat cutter? Well, you see, you can have all the potential in the world, but without the guidance, without the knowledge, without the ambition or the execution of it, on it, like, it can all be for nothing. And, man, I have a feeling that if he had stayed in the Navy, and they had, from everything I can tell, they had the desire to build him up and to really realize his potential. It's like, even if it had only been for a couple more years or so, like, I get the sense that he would have, lived a lot longer and accomplished a lot more. And I wonder how that would have changed my family tree, if I would even be here, for better or for worse. But, because for him it was, like, for instance, it was alcoholism. For me, it's like, drawing parallels. My alcoholism has been PMO addiction or PMO compulsion. That's been my deal. And of course, I got the fear that my thing, that, my PMO addiction or compulsion has, in many ways, done, similar things, damaging my health and shortening my life the way, alcoholism shortened his life, Damn. It's been a real roller coaster, and I'm hoping to sort of, close the chapter on this, or close the book on this, in the near future, and sort of like be able to make my peace with that, and, having truly like gotten to know my grandfather, and through the process of knowing him, or coming to know him, because he was only in my life for a few years, getting to know myself, and to therefore understand my family, and understand like my life, and make peace with a lot of things at my age, because there's like a lot that I need to make peace with, and there's things that I shouldn't accept, and knowing the difference between the two is really like one of those key things that I really want to gain from all of this. But it's kind of like the whole, like, accepting what you cannot change, changing what you cannot accept sort of a deal. But anyways, that's sort of a follow-up to it. See if I can upload this, and I'll see how long it'll take, because I know the last one like took like a hell of a long time to upload. But anyways, thanks for watching, thanks for support. Appreciate the perspective, and I'll see you folks around. Bye bye.